talk about what is agroforestry, its benefits, and how is the situation in Germany. And then we have Lyubomir Hristov, who was born in Bulgaria, but moved to Spain when he was 12. He came to Germany for his bachelor, and now it's doing a master in sustainable management and technology. He will give his talk on nudging consumers to greener purchasing decisions, which is based on his bachelor thesis, where he explored how participants in an experimental setting could be nudged to pick more eco-friendly products. First, we will have a talk, and then there will be a small Q&A round. So feel free to either write your questions on the chat or open your microphone. And then we will have our second talk. And after that, we will have another Q&A session where you can address also both speakers. And now, without further ado, Tabea, the floor is all yours.
So then, yeah, a warm welcome to everyone and to the talk about agroforestry in Germany today. And you might have heard about agroforestry. I will give you a short definition about it. So this definition is very broad, actually, and I always say agroforestry is the combination of trees, crops, and or livestock on the same area. So basically, you can imagine 100 different types of practices under this term, and they might even not be called agroforestry, but have a different type of or a different name, because they also exist for several hundreds or thousands of years. So what could be agroforestry? How does it look like? So in the tropics, we could imagine shadow coffee. So the shadowed plants are grown under trees, and they benefit from the shadow of the trees. And we also have different or other types of practices, like the second and third picture. This is a montado or dehesa in Spain and Portugal, and there are mighty cork oaks on grassland, and there are also sheep which are grazing the land and nourishing the land actually with their excrement. So these are more traditional types of agroforestry, and in Germany we also have other types. Here also a more traditional one on the left side. It's a meadow orchard. There are actually fruit or nut trees also on grassland, and maybe also with sheep grazing on that land. But we can also have more modern types. So the second and the third picture. The second picture shows a type that is called alley cropping. So you have the alley of corn in the middle, separated with alleys of trees on the side. And here you can imagine trees for wood production or for valuable wood, or also trees for nut production. And on the right hand side, we see chicken, which are living under, in this case, under poplar. So they are also benefiting from the shadow of the poplar. And in Germany, so there are these type of old agroforestry practices which have been there for hundreds of years, and which got abolished actually when chemical fertilizers and the huge machinery were introduced. So that was a time when trees on the field were actually an obstacle to cultivating the land, and all these trees have been removed. And since after the Second World War, actually we also see a legal separation between agriculture on the one hand and forestry on the other hand. So they are really two really separated practices here in Germany and in Europe actually too. So, but this old agroforestry really got abolished. But recently we also see a kind of revival of agroforestry. And as I recognized this, I asked myself, what does agroforestry actually do right now to become again, or to become for the first time actually legally recognized as a practice in Germany? I used two methods to analyze this. And first, I collected different political acts, studies, speeches, websites, whatever I could find to define the context of agroforestry. So what happened in the past? What was the historical process, so that I really can contextualize agroforestry in its historical development. And the second method was to conduct and analyze actually interviews. So I conducted 10 in-depth interviews, each one about 1 hour. And I found different politicians and scientists and also practitioners, that was really important to me, who practice agroforestry and also different types of agroforestry. And in the end, I could identify 3 mechanisms that are at play right now when agroforestry becomes recognized as a legal practice. And the first thing, and that's also kind of a unique selling point, is that agroforestry promises to combine or unite productivity and biodiversity on the other side. Because often we think, or we have the image that if we want to have more biodiversity or ecological benefits, this at the same time reduces productivity. If you consider organic farming, for example, there is always the outplay or the trade-off between productivity and biodiversity. And here agroforestry really can combine these two things. That's how it is advertised, for example, on the internet. But when I had a closer look under the surface, I realized that science really focuses on productivity. So the scientific studies were about productivity, and the scientists themselves said in the interviews, so productivity is our main focus, and biodiversity, it's nice to have ecological benefits, but it's only an add-on, it's not the main point. On the contrary, the practitioners whom I interviewed, they all had different aims with agroforestry. For them, productivity was not as important, but they said, I really want to I want to increase the animal welfare for my animals. So one person had forest hogs, so he kept pigs really in the forest, and he said it's the best for them. They really enjoy the space and the shadow from the trees. And others, they wanted to increase the beauty of the landscape when they were planting trees. Again, others, they wanted to increase they wanted to reduce the soil erosion and wind erosion by planting trees and also by planting shrubs. So here we can really see different outcomes when we have a look at different layers. This also points to the next point. Here I could identify that even though these different actors had different aims with agroforestry, their knowledge could be hybridized. So this means that in scientific papers, they always approached practitioners, and they asked them and they involved the practitioners into the scientific research, and vice versa. So the practitioners I interviewed, they always said, we invite the scientists to come to our side and to do the scientific research. So here, these different knowledge types, they are entangled and they intermingle. So agroforestry actually really is a boundary object that is able to bring different actors together, even though these different actors might have different ideas in their minds about agroforestry. And the third mechanism I could identify was that after a scientific study, a lobby group was founded, and this really created this category for action. So it's not only about science and about practice, but about really becoming active and becoming visible on the political scale to be able to change something. But here we see, and that is why this historical background was very important, that they can't act on a green field. So they just can't plan kind of a new law and hand it over to the government and say, okay, please verify or ratify this new law according to our imaginary, but they really had to find this niche where agroforestry fits in. And here we have kind of a lock-in. So as I said, agriculture and forestry are separated since the Second World War by law in Germany. And it is really difficult to bring these two things together. Agroforestry could do that, or we could conceive agroforestry as a practice with both agriculture and forestry. But on the political scale, this lobby group had to decide for one side, and they went for the agricultural side. So they said, we want to promote agroforestry on agricultural lands, and now they only focus on the wood production and basically also on the production of biomass. And this is why then I asked the practitioners what they think. And they said, oh, we don't consider ourselves agroforesters because we actually do not comply with this new definition that the lobby group prepared, because they had to simplify it so that it fits into the current law. And we really do not think that we also fit in there. And this is a very crucial point, actually. So we can see that when this very diverse and very complex concept of agroforestry is on the way of being institutionalized, it also gets simplified. So all these many different aspects that we can imagine cannot be written down in one law, but here it will definitely have to be simplified. But that also means that when the law is published, that a lot of different practices will get erased actually from the landscape of agroforestry. So to conclude, what are the most important points? I found out that 3 mechanisms are at play here. So it's really about this uniting and merging different aims and different actors and different types of knowledge, and this process of becoming politically visible. And the distinguishing factor, I think, of agroforestry is this creating of unity. That is something agroforestry distinguishes from other sustainability practices, because I always have the impression that sustainability sometimes is about decide for yourself, decide on which side you want to be on. And here we really can have this unity, and everyone can participate, and you can have everything that you want, actually. But nevertheless, there are these fallacies on the way of institutionalizing agroforestry. So this institutionalization is really contingent on the historical development. So it's not on the green field, but it really depends on the laws and the historical processes that have been there before. And this also ultimately leads to the challenge that possibly certain views can get erased in the end when we finally have a law that defines what is agroforestry and what it is not. So, and now I hope in the end that you also can see the contribution that qualitative research can make here. So, as you saw, this is not natural science research about the advantages and disadvantages of agroforestry, not at all, but rather we are looking at processes, at power structures, and we really try to be reflective about what is going on and provide an analysis of the status quo, also maybe for decision makers, just to realize what is actually going on and to hopefully make a good informed decision afterwards. So thank you for your attention, and yeah, I'm open to, so that you can contact me on LinkedIn if you have some further questions, or if you just want to get in touch. I will publish the master thesis most probably on Mediatom, and hopefully also in a journal, but you know that takes time. So I want to open the discussion with the question maybe to you. You can also ask questions, but what do you think? What potential does agroforestry offer here in this context in Germany? So do you have any ideas about that? I will be very happy to listen. So then I will stop sharing the thank you, the screen. And yeah, happy to hear your questions or to answer my questions, what you think, what agroforestry can contribute, or what are the possibilities. Are you the moderator, Samantha? So
yeah, go ahead, Julia.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. I don't know. For my side, I never heard too much about agroforestry. I'm studying sustainable resource management, and I heard the term like often used by professors, like if they already give for granted that we know what it means. But it was very good to hear like more in details how it works and like the limits that it had, like the challenges that it has, and so on. And I found it interesting because I'm currently taking some courses about landscape management, and I think it's quite related to what I'm learning there and how we manage the space and the fact that we have to involve like stakeholders whenever we want to make plans and so on, because it's really important for like having then like good results in the end. So yeah, I found it very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And as I said, this might be one option to involve many stakeholders and also satisfy them, so that there's not a trade-off in aims, but maybe a compilation of aims.
How was actually for you to carry out this research and get in contact with them? Was it easy to communicate with them during your research, or did you have any challenges?
Yeah, actually, so I found them on mostly, I think, on the agroforestry map. So there's an interactive map on the internet provided by the lobby group, and people can insert their their farm actually there and write some more information. And I just got in contact, and as it always is with interviews, some people write you back at the same day and some never write you back. But if I got an answer, I got in closer contact, and yeah, it was really easy actually to find these people. They were really willing to share their experiences. And a sentence I often heard was like, oh, this is really gaining momentum. You're like the fourth person in this year that contacts me for an interview or for something. So people seem to be really interested right now, and yeah, also willing to share their experiences there.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I kind of expected there were maybe more like that they were not that open to share information with you, because I know that sometimes there is some maybe they're not that open to share information with universities or students or so. So that's good that they're so interested.
Yeah, definitely. But that was maybe also a special characteristic of them, because I hesitated to call them farmers, because for me a farmer is actually a person who does an apprenticeship in farming and kind of inherits this farm from his or her parents, or like this. But the people I interviewed, none of them was this classical farmer. And then I invented the term neo-practitioners, because they studied something or they did a different kind of apprenticeship, and which did not really have to do with farming. So some did also natural resource management and forest management, and one person studied agroeconomics. So they came mostly from a university background, and after their studies they decided, I have to do something. I really have to get into this practice, because only talking about it, it's not enough. So I really have to start something. And that's also maybe why they were so open. I don't know if other people would be less open, but that might also be an explanation why they are very very close to university anyways, because they also did similar things in their own studies, and yeah, might be used to that, and might also have the confidence to speak. I could imagine that other people would be more like, oh, I'm not very good at speaking, so why do you want to interview me? But that was never the case. But it might also have to do with, yeah, the background of the people. Yeah.
Yes, Chrissy, go ahead.
Yes, I would have one question because you mentioned the difficulties with like the different lobby groups and the understanding of what the focus is. I mean, now last year the government changed and a lot of ministers changed, but I thought what you explained was quite interesting because right now I'm writing about a lot about forestry in Germany, and I mean, what was rather weird to me is that, for example, the forest strategy was originated by the BMEL, so the Bundesministerium für Ernährung und Landwirtschaft, where you at the first glance would not really expect forests to appear. So I'm not sure if you followed up on the changes, but do you think like a change of the government or yeah, replacing certain people in the ministry also might affect the situation in the future? Because I didn't look especially for the term agroforestry now during my research, but I wouldn't remember that I came across it in the forest strategy, for example, which is a guideline for the process of in forestry until the year 2050. So yeah, I'm not sure if what's your opinion about that.
That's actually an interesting point, because I mean, a lot of people from the Green Party are now in new positions. So yeah, last year in January they approved a petition in the German parliament, and towards the end of the year they also proposed a draft of a law or something. But I think these processes are also kind of very slow, so I don't know when it really takes effect that the government changes. So I think it's actually a good question when this draft of a law was approved, but there the feedback was that it is, yeah, the subsidies are too low and the parameters are too strict and everything. So right now it did not take effect that the government changes, but let's see how it goes on in the future. And maybe, because actually this would be a perfect topic for the Green Party. So what else than agroforestry? But right now I don't know if it already is in place. Like,
Tabea, now Lyubomir.
Yeah, so I just have a question. Maybe I don't know how much it is related to agroforestry, but it was an interesting experience that I had with a student initiative in Campus Straubing. Maybe you know it as the other TUM campus on the Danube, and we are trying to collect potatoes or vegetables that would otherwise be thrown away by farmers to reuse them. I was just wondering, as the first question, whether you think with agroforestry there could be less food waste during farming. And secondly, a more interesting point was one of the farmers we spoke with. She mentioned that they had attempted to do more sustainable farming practices on their land. But I don't remember exactly if it was something like agroforestry. I believe they were trying to implement no-tilling or cover crops. But in any case, she said that it was very hard to convince their neighbors to do the same, or it was rather hard for them to communicate with other farmers about the topic because of the tried and true ways that other farmers were convinced would work, and they had absolutely no time to listen to them. And I was just wondering if if you think is it even harder now for these kind of newcomers, so as you say, not really farmers, to come into the field and then try to convince maybe their neighbors or other farmers around them to start such sustainable practices?
Oh, thank you. That's also two very, very good questions. So the first thing, food waste, reducing food waste, of course, it can be part of agroforestry, because I would say that the people practicing it might also be more aware of these things, but it is not necessarily a part, because if you still use your normal machinery and you sell it to your normal food retailer, the classical norms will apply, and if your potatoes are too big or too small, you can't sell them. So if these norms stay in place, nothing will change in that perspective. But I hope, or I would hope, that the practitioners are aware of this and would maybe allow other people to, after collect the potatoes that stayed on the field or something like this. This would definitely be possible, but yeah, it's not necessarily a part of agroforestry. And the second part, convincing others, that was also something I heard quite often. So that the parents removed all the trees from the fields and were very happy about that because it promised efficiency. And then the children came and they replanted shrubs and trees for ecological benefits, and that the parents or the older generation said, oh my goodness, what are you doing there? It's contrasting everything that we learned, so why are you doing this? And then on the other side, when they had success with that, other people would follow, or other people would also see their success and really recognize it. And another narrative is that older people were like, oh, that's good, that is like in my childhood, I can recognize the landscapes, it's like it was back then. And that these old people were really happy about trees coming back to the landscape. So there are kind of different narratives, but as often, if you have a good example and a good role model, it's easier to follow, because you can really witness, you can be an eyewitness what are the benefits of this. Yeah.
Thank you.
Elise? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And we have only time for one more question. So in case someone else wants to ask something, you can put it on the chat. And now, Eliza, sorry if I mispronounced your name. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's Eliza. I have a question about the lobby. What kind of, I was wondering about other groups. Do they face resistance from foresters or from conventional farmers, or with what they're trying to petition, or is it just a political pushback that for the logistics, it would be very hard, for example, to get the laws to pass to make a new law about agroforestry and what it is? Or do they also have a pushback from other communities or other groups that are different or do something different from what they want to do? I don't know if I asked it in a good way, but
yeah, thank you for the question. As far as I understood, you want to know if there were kind of adversaries, so other groups that tried to diminish the influence of the lobby group. And actually, I was also very surprised that I didn't find any person arguing against agroforestry. So no one seems to be against it. Politicians really were in favor, and the practitioners, of course, and scientists, and everyone really was in favor, and no one had kind of good reasons or good arguments against it. But it's like this, yeah, we have always done it like this, so agriculture and forestry are separated, and yeah, so that's it. So only the historical background is kind of the counter player or something, but there was never, because I mean, if you have renewable energies, you might think there is the oil lobby against this and all these big players and everything, but this is actually not at all the case here, because no one loses. Actually, everyone can win, and even manufacturers of tools, because this is also argument. So I can't use my big machinery if I have these rows of trees, because I somehow have to cultivate my land. But also, industry, they could invent smaller machines again. So there's also not an argument that that agroforestry would not work, or that they could be adversaries. So actually, I looked for it, but I didn't find anyone who is really against it or working against it. Yeah.
Thank you, Tabea. Thank you.
You.
Thanks everyone who asked their questions. And now we will go to our next talk. So, Lyubomir, the floor is yours.
So thanks a lot for having me on. My name is Lyubomir, or Lubo for short, and today I'll be talking about nudging consumers into making greener purchasing decisions and how to do that. Just a brief outline of my talk. I just want to motivate a little bit why we need more green products and explain more or less what green is and how to measure how much green product is, as well as the ethical purchasing gap that we find. And then I want to just briefly go into some economic models and why we have behavior economics to better predict people's behavior. And just an example from experiments. Before then moving on to nudging as a topic as a part of behavior economics. And then into my the experiment that I did for my thesis and the results. And then afterwards, questions and discussions. So I don't think I need to motivate too much why we need to limit anthropogenic emissions. There's been a lot of research that's done on that, and this is figures from 2019 in a report that listed agricultural sector and the food sector as having very large negative externalities and huge water usage, as well as about 30% of global emissions annually. And a lot of that comes from the production or post-production processes of animal food products. To achieve to limit the amount of externalities or emissions that come from this industry, we need both sustainable production and consumption. So it has to come from, it has to be demand from the consumer side for products that don't pollute as much. And one example for such products is green products that are defined as follows. They use recycled resources, they reduce the toxic damage, so eutrophication, for example, during farming, and improve the environmental impact during their life cycle. But you need a very specific way to measure that, and the way this is done is with something called LCA. Perhaps some of you know this, life cycle analysis. Life cycle analysis just measures or accounts for the emissions or CO2 equivalents during the production of a product, during the processing, transportation, and distribution. And it accounts for different impact indicators on land, water, and energy usage, for example. And so that's a way you can really put a grade on products. And there's been an experimental score called the Eco Score that seeks to use these LCAs for different products, so specifically food products, from a database, and then give them a grade, and then assign a bonus or malus points for example, the origins of the ingredients, the types of packaging, the seasonality, and biolabels, for example, that aren't typically included in the life cycle analysis. So this score has a pretty huge potential if we want to incentivize sustainable consumption, since people would be able to see for each product that they would buy at the store whether it's being harmful for the environment to produce this product or not. And yeah, this in the top right corner is just an example of how this score would look like. So we, even if we make it very clear what a green product is and how good it is for the environment, do people still choose not to buy such products? That's obviously the case. Then this sort of gap between what people say they would like to do, they say they would like to help the environment, they say they would like to make better purchasing decisions for a greener product, but instead they purchase the one that isn't as good for the environment. Or for example, they eat a lot of meat, right, which has more, during the production has more harmful effects. Yeah, the question is, why does that happen? And a big part of this barrier for consumers is, for example, the low availability or the high price, or sometimes they have insufficient trust in a product, and so they will choose not to buy that. The important thing here would be to incentivize their purchase with something like the eco score, right? So that they would see on the front of pack, as it's called, the front of pack label, that this product is actually worth investing in, it's worth buying. In a sense, it's very similar to scores that exist already for different products, like the Nutri-Score, which has been implemented in most retailers in Germany, as far as I know, which is just a voluntary label that assigns the nutritional value to different products. So it incentivizes consumers to make healthier purchases without having to think too much about all the different values that are listed on the product. And so it would be important to try and do the same for an eco score. And that was the motivation for my thesis, was to explore how these two scores can work with one another, and hopefully to show that it would be beneficial to include an eco score on products. So yeah, and then just quickly to dip our feet in some economic models. To show why people aren't always rational and don't always act in accordance to these models. And one of these models is utility and preferences. So on the left here, you can see two products that someone has to pick in between, and both of these products will give someone a certain utility, right? And you can have higher utilities based on the more products you have of those two, let's say, cereals. But of course, people are constrained by budget. However, it turns out that people can't always know all their preferences. So I could have a lot of cereals and I can't know which ones I really love and which ones I really don't like. So what do people actually do when they're in a store, or when they're first coming into a store? How do they know their preferences? How do they calculate that? And that's where behavior economics comes in. So behavior economics basically describes why people behave the way they do and how the standard economic model would fail to predict that behavior. And a big part of that is experiments. So a lot of it comes from experimental data, where they find that people act according to simple heuristics to calculate what they prefer. And of course, sometimes those heuristics fail or act in surprising ways. In ways in which the preferences that I listed on the previous slide are violated, actually. And you have, for example, based on the choice structure that you are giving someone, they would prefer a different product than the one they would typically pick. And one example for that is the endowment effect, which has been tested now numerous times, which shows basically that if someone is given something to them, so they're endowed with a product like this cereal, they will give it way more worth than having to pick that cereal from someone else or buy that cereal. And the measured value here is so the measured let's say disutility from giving away this product compared to the utility of getting this product is about twice. So it's about 2 times the utility of getting the product, which is an interesting value. So it basically shows that behavior economic experiments show that people act in ways that are contrary to standard economic theory, but they do that in predictable ways. And you can predict those ways and actually help people to make decisions and nudge people into making better decisions for themselves or for the environment. And a lot of this this framework for nudging has been laid down by the economist Richard Thaler. In fact, he made a book. He wrote a book called Nudging, and it basically means changing the choice architecture to change behavior without forbidding the bad options and without altering economic incentives. So it's a cheap and easy intervention. Basically, like you have apples on the front shelf instead of the very bad cereals, like the very sweet cereals. So you just change the order of things. You don't forbid anything, and that is a policy decision that a lot of research and funding has gone to, and that's also the framework that I laid for my own thesis. It's also called liberal paternalism for those of you who are interested in policy. So yeah, just moving on to my thesis now. I used, as I mentioned previously, the EcoScore and Nutri-Score. I used those for the nudging, and I used something called the EAI, which is the Environmental Attitudes Inventory, for the priming of the experiment. So I had two groups. One of them was the treatment group, so they got this EAI inventory before they saw anything else. And this inventory basically measures what the attitude of a person is towards nature, and it measures it in two scales. So preservation and utilization, but yeah, that's not that important. The fact of the matter is it primes them into thinking about their preferences for the environment, their environmental behavior. And once they complete that, the participants get a list of choices. So it's 3 sets of choices that you see on the bottom right. And each choice has 2 alternatives. One of the alternatives is the worst one, because you get a poorer nutritional score for yourself. So if people are purely selfish, as standard economic models would tell us, they would pick the Nutri-Score that's better for themselves, right? Because they don't want to. I'll just have some water, sorry. So if people are very selfish, they would pick a higher Nutri-Score. It's in a sense a cost to themselves if they pick the lower Nutri-Score. So it harms them in a sense. And the higher eco-score would then represent their willingness to cooperate, to be to save the environment, basically, to make sure that they have a sustainable consumption pattern. And they were given 3 of these choices, as I mentioned. And with each choice, they had a harder time picking an alternative because the Nutri-Score kept going down on average. So in the first choice, they would have a Nutri-Score of A and alternative 2. So if they're very selfish, they would always pick the second alternative every time. But if they weren't selfish and they wanted to help, for alternative 1, it wouldn't. For choice 1, they would pick alternative 1, which wouldn't be so hard to make. That's just the middle nutritional score. But with each subsequent choice, their score for the nutrition would go lower as the eco score went higher. And so I decided to rank these products as high quality, intermediate quality, and low quality. And here is just represented as a tuple, so a set of 2 tuples. And I was curious how their choices between these 2 treatment groups, between these 2 groups of the treatment and the control, how that would alter as the experiment went on. And to remind you, the treatment group had the environmental attitudes inventory, and the other group didn't. So the results were interesting. So there was definitely a difference between the treatment group and the control group. Here they're listed as EIA post. So the EIA post is the control group, and EIA prior is the treatment group. So you can see that in terms of decisions for or choices for alternative one, people in the treatment group were making less of those choices, and then people in the so as with each subsequent choice, the number was pretty much the same. So for EIA prior, it's 18, 14, 17, and for EIA post, it's 22, 23, 25. The number of choices for alternative one in each of the choices. And the interesting thing is that the gap between them expands as time goes on. So with each choice, people will pick, they will kind of step down on their preferred alternative. So whether they want to be selfish or whether they want to give to the environment. And in the end, the gap is quite large. So 65.8% versus 42.5% for the control treatment and the for the control group and the treatment group. So that was an interesting finding, and of course, those results are to be taken with a grain of salt because they're with a quite small sample, and of course, the experiment itself was rather underpowered. But because the results were interesting, I've heard that the chair for economics at the TUM is now considering doing a study based on this with more with real incentives instead of Nutri-Score. They would use actual monetary values and an eco-score, and the participants will be given a voucher at the end of the experiment. So they would actually be incentivized to make real choices, unlike the motivation that they had for my experiment. So yeah, thank you. That was it. And yeah.
Lyubomir, that was really interesting. So now if anyone has questions, you can raise your hand or write it on the chat. Ms. Chrissy, go ahead.
I can start. First of all, thank you. It was really interesting. I learned a little bit about nudging in my bachelor, but yeah, it's interesting to see it from a different perspective. What I was wondering, you mentioned that you had the Nutri-Score and the like the eco-score as two measures, kind of. And I was wondering, like, as far as I know about the Nutri-Score, it compares always products within the same product group. So for example, the Nutri-Score would compare yogurts, or it would compare milk, but not milk and yogurt, for example. I'm not sure if that's correct, but in general, I think that's how the comparison works. Is it the same for the eco-score? And in your case, did you make a difference between that, or was it just about having a score which gives you something which regards your health, and on the other side, a score which makes a statement about the effects of the product on the environment?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So unlike the Nutri-Score, the eco-score basically measures pretty much the same for every product category. So it's a very general score based on, as I say, the LCA. So as long as there's an LCA that can be conducted, and that there can be for every product. So if the data is available, then you can have this comparison on how damaging it is to the environment based on it. But of course, usually you would compare with LCAs, and particularly you would compare products that are in a similar category, because usually you would want to know, should you produce, I don't know, mugs from bone, or should you make mugs from plastic, for example? Then you're making a decision based on the scores that the production of those different products would have. But for food, I would say for consumers, it's important, yeah, the overall impact that a food item would have. So I think that in that case, it's important to have such a general score. Yeah. And sorry, did that answer your question? Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. And now, Tabea.
Yeah, thank you for the interesting presentation. From my background, I would be interested in the ethics of nudging, because you already called it liberal paternalism. And paternalism also is a concept that is criticized widely, I would say. And it would be possible to interpret nudging as this, yeah, that someone else makes decisions for you without you realizing it. So what do you think about this? And what would you say, how is it different from advertising? Because for me, advertising would be the same. So someone else telling you what you need without actually you needing it. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a good question. With so nudging should definitely not be exploitative. As I say, there's no they don't change with nudging. You don't want to change. You only would you say you only change the choice architecture of people. You don't try to forbid anything from them. And but certainly you can't. You have to decide on a case-by-case basis whether a nudge is ethical or not, I would say, because it's very hard to just say any nudging is fine, and then you leave it to companies to do their marketing campaigns, of course, and they'll find any way to exploit you that they can. But in that sense, nudging is different from marketing, I would say, because it's more evidence-based or science-based. So whenever you are implementing nudging as perhaps as a government, you want to make sure that it's done for a beneficial effect. You obviously wouldn't want to make people worse off with nudging. So for example, in the US, they changed this 401k form, if I remember correctly, for the pension plan, and they changed it into an opt-out form. So that meant, it was a kind of, it's not exactly a nudge, but in a sense, it's giving the choice for people to choose to opt out of that pension plan instead of to opt in. So then people would already have that pension plan in place for them, and they wouldn't have to worry about it, rather than having to specifically think about, okay, what pension plan do I need now? I need to opt into this plan, which far fewer people did, according to experimental results. So in that case, it is like paternalism from the government, because they are making the choice for you in a way and expecting you to opt out if you really don't want to have a pension plan. But on the other side, anyone can opt out, and the people who are opting in aren't really harmed. So yeah, but as I say, you have to decide on a case-by-case basis what's ethical and what's not. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we have another question on the chat. It says, can nudging take place through other ways? Like this example was about EAI scores and Nutri-scores. If these scores don't have a widespread usage, any ideas as to how it can take place?
So the nudging in my experiment was done with the eco score and the Nutri score. The EIA was just a way to prime participants so that I could read, so I could get different, so I could see a difference basically in how people interpreted the nudges. But the ones I had in my experiment, they were purposely pushing people in two directions. So the eco score was pushing them into the more, as I say, like cooperative direction, so preserving nature, and the Nutri score is pushing them into the selfish direction. Yeah, of course, you would probably need to have. I couldn't do it with. I couldn't give a monetary value instead of the Nutri-Score. I would have preferred to do that, but I couldn't incentivize participants with real money for my thesis. But that would be one way to nudge in real life. So you would have a price that sets products apart. I would say for products which are, let's say, bio-labels, the price differentiation can actually hurt them. So if you want to nudge people, let's say, into buying bio products, bio labels, which are in a sense more environmentally friendly, and there's no eco score yet, unfortunately, so they haven't implemented it. But if you want to make them more palatable for people, then you should give them a lower price. So make them part of the same market as normal products. That would definitely work as a nudge as well. If you don't have a score in, if we don't have an eco score yet, that's the best we can do. I would say. Does that answer the question? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for one more question in case someone else has another one. If not, I actually have questions. So with this, how would you say it's like the future for grocery shopping?
That's an interesting point, because I recently was at a talk from some of the some grocery companies like Reve and some other I don't know, I'm not sure how you would call them, food suppliers like HelloFresh. You probably know them. They have a slightly different model, of course, than the typical retailer. And I heard that basically at Reve they wouldn't really, or at least the spokesperson who was at the talk said that they didn't really believe in in front of pack labels. So they didn't like the fact that they were giving people too much information. So it's not that they wanted to limit people in what information they got, but they didn't like the idea of having having too many front of pack labels. So like a Nutri-Score and Eco-Score would be too much. So it leaves the future a bit uncertain. From my work with the thesis, I thought that it would be a good direction to go in, to try and influence people's behavior, because we have the frameworks from behavior economics there to do that. We have the power in Europe, at least, for governments to implement such policies. But another side of the coin is that maybe going for consumers for making consumer behavior change is actually not the way to go. Maybe we should instead really focus on policies to try and prevent products from being produced with really bad environmental externalities. So it's a bit uncertain, but there's a lot of discussion to be had still on that.
Thank you. Well, that's certainly something interesting, and I will definitely will search for more information of what happens, because I don't know, for me as a consumer, I would prefer to have this type of information, so I have like a more informed way to buy the things I need. But let's see what happens. Thank you a lot for your talk. And now I will just, so thank you all for joining. This is our kind of new webpage from the Green Team. There you can contact us in case you want to collaborate and give a talk, or if you have some comments or feedback. And also our social media, it's our Instagram and LinkedIn account. So feel free to leave any comments or questions you have. And once again, thanks everyone for joining on our 11th session, and have a good evening.